Most of the time, if it's 2 a.m. in a forest somewhere and I'm racing, my mind is alert because, you're having to watch where you're going. You're wondering how many miles to the next aid station. You might be trying to stay ahead of someone else. So the drama and adrenaline keeps you awake.
Yes, you heard that right. She said racing in a forest at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm Elizabeth Pearson-Garr, and on this episode of the Experience Podcast, we get up to speed with ultramarathoner, trail runner, author, and coach, Sarah Lavender Smith. Sarah has competed in and even won races from 50 kilometers to 100 miles long. And sometimes she runs for 24 hours straight. Hello, Sarah, and thank you for joining me on my podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here to talk about running and ultra running.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. It's something I like talking about, so I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm fascinated to hear about it because I am someone who likes to exercise. I feel like it gives me mental clarity and sort of emotionally clears my mind and feels good physically. But I've never once thought it would be a really fun project, run 100 miles. That just has never occurred to me.
Uh-huh.
So I'm wondering, what is it that's in you and in people like you that has that extra motivation to do so much more than the rest of us?
Well, everybody's different. I will say I was a late bloomer, that I was not an athletic teenager or college student. I never really played sports. And I got into running kind of by chance as a graduate student in my mid-20s. I was 24 years old. And I think it clicked with me because of physiologically, the feeling it gave me was so good. And it was unlike anything I had ever experienced earlier in life, since I had not had that athletic or competitive satisfaction earlier in life. But then psychologically, I think the structure of it, I came to running at a time in life. I was a graduate student at UC Berkeley School of Journalism, and I was super stressed out. And during that time, I took up running, and the stress release it gave me and the very simple sense of satisfaction and accomplishment that each run gave me, that's what really got me hooked. And I love the efficiency of it. I mean, I love going to the gym too, and I do yoga videos here at home, and I do some other sports, and I enjoy working out. But the structure of running and working up to longer events is what really appeals to me. And the build up to get ready for a longer competition, I just really relish that and the goal at the end of it.
Did you start running small amounts? I mean, did you start with just a few miles and then eventually you became a marathoner? And then after how many years or months did that turn into the desire to do ultramarathons?
So I did start small, of course. I had never in my life run more than 6 laps around a track, which is a mile and a half. So I started by doubling that with little 3-mile runs. And I got into it by chance because I had a couple of friends who were training for a marathon. It was just a mind-blowing thing. Like I didn't know anyone could do that. And I was very inspired by all the average looking people crossing the finish line. So I thought, okay. And I just had this secret goal after observing that to come back and do that marathon myself. So it was a 1-year process. So the next day I did my first ever 3-mile run, and I learned all I could. And so that March of 1995, I ran my first marathon, and I had a goal to run the whole thing without walking breaks and try to break 4 hours, which is averaging roughly 9-minute miles. And I did it. And I was not feeling really confident in other areas of life. And I think the running gave me a space in my life to do my own thing, to think, and to incrementally make progress. Running is very quantifiable. Keeping a running log was really satisfying. And so that's how I got hooked on it. And when I kind of mommy tracked my career, it was again, an area of life that brought me both physical satisfaction and then on a psychological level, more ego gratification when I was like, coping with being a new mother and wondering if I was ever going to be the journalist I trained to be. And so running was like my friend and therapist every day.
And did you tend to create your own training regimens, or did you have a coach who helped you figure out, like, here's your goal and here's how you can attain it? Or did you create all that for yourself?
A little bit of both. I was training for 10Ks and marathons, and this was the late 90s. I'd just gotten out of graduate school. I was working as a reporter. And in my neighborhood of Kensington, this little town north of North Berkeley, there was this woman I would observe running. She'd always run by our house on her way to the trails in Tilden Park. And I asked someone, who is that? And her name is Ann Trayson. And so Ann Trayson, to this day, still is one of the greatest female ultra runners in the world, and some of her records still stand.
Wow.
She won the Western States 100
Yeah.
miler 14 times. She was legendary. And then in the mid to late 90s, she was at the peak of her running career. So I got to know her, and she offered help, and I wrote a profile of her for a local newspaper, and it just completely opened my mind.
Wow.
It's as if, a young woman starts getting into soccer and then they realize Mia Hamm is their neighbor and Mia Hamm decides to help them out. It was really similar to that. So that's how I learned about the sport even before I started running trails and going longer distances. In the mid 2000s, after doing a bunch of road marathons, I became more interested in trail running, and I tackled the 50K distance and started running 50Ks.
So I don't know really anything about running, so apologies for the dumb questions, but is trail running literally just running on trails?
Trail running is literally just running on trails. So trail running and ultra running are not synonymous. I mean, they're trail races at shorter distances. The difference between trail and road running is trail running has a lot more variety and challenges of terrain. So you tend to have a much hillier elevation profile, and you have the natural obstacles of rocks
Mm.
and roots and things like that. So running trails tends to be slower, but I find it appealing because of the variety and because of the being in the natural environment. So ultra running is anything longer than a marathon. And the standard distances are 50K, which is 31 miles, 50 miles, 100K, which is 62, and then 100 miles. And then there are also fixed time events, such as 24-hour events where you run for 24 hours and the person who racks up the most mileage within that set time period is the
I
winner.
mean, that just blows my mind. When I read that you did some of those, and I, I thought, I can't even stay awake for 24 hours. And here you are running for 24 hours or sometimes more. Seriously, how do you do that? You've clearly trained a lot for that, but can you just walk me through that process of running for so long?
Well, we do take breaks. There are things called aid stations along the way where you stop and eat and drink. But there's a saying called beware the chair, which is you don't want to sit down because it's too hard to get up and start going again. So it's funny, I do not struggle with sleep all that much during the middle of these events unless it gets monotonous. So most of the time, if it's 2 a.m. in a forest somewhere and I'm racing, my mind is alert because you're having to watch where you're going. You're wondering how many miles to the next aid
Hmm.
station. You might be trying to stay ahead of someone else. So the drama and adrenaline keeps you awake. But I tell you, the times where I struggled with falling asleep the most were the two times I did a 24-hour event. Both took place at Crissy Field in San Francisco, which is just a flat waterfront area. And the course was a 1 mile rectangle. So we had to do repeat
Oh,
loops on a 1 mile rectangle. And the monotony of that made me sleepy. And so you need to play mental games. So, for example, I made a game out of trying to notice something different every single time on that loop. And so it made me highly mindful of that one tiny strip of geography. And it was surprisingly interesting. I mean, you get to see the day in the life of one place. And so it's very meditative, but nonetheless, that got sleepy. And I will say, my last 100 miler in the mountains last summer, it was a really tough 100 miler through the Sawatch Range in central Colorado. And, we went up over 13,000 feet a couple of times. It was extreme weather in terms of downpours and lightning. So there were a lot of obstacles and things to overcome throughout the way. And that was the first time at about 4 a.m. I was going along this forest road, and I just could not keep my eyes open. And I knew from past experience, I get sleepy driving.
Yeah.
Whenever I drive somewhere by myself, I get so sleepy. And I know if I pull over and close my eyes for 10 minutes, I feel like a new person. So it was the first time at this race, I got out my emergency bivy, which is like an emergency blanket that you wrap around yourself. I put it on and I passed out. And I set an alarm on my phone for 10 minutes. And I woke up completely refreshed and started running again. So I did take a nap during one race, but it really helped. And it was worth those
I'm
10
glad
minutes.
it just didn't get you drowsier.
No, the real risk was getting cold. I mean, when you're in the mountains in the middle of the night, you have to pay a lot of attention to regulating your body temperature and avoid catching a chill.
And then how about regulating your body and cramping up? How can your body sustain that much continuous exercise for that many hours? Clearly, you're incredibly well trained and fit.
Yeah, so that's one thing I love about extra long ultra marathons is there's so much strategy involved around what I call systems management. And what that means is the person who is the fastest or physically fit is not necessarily the one who's going to win the race. It's the person who's the smartest and most strategic about taking care of their body along the way. So the key things for systems management are fueling. So being able to eat and get in calories, hydration and electrolyte balance, and then thermoregulation. So not getting too hot or too cold, and preventing injuries. I mean, you don't want to trip and fall and really hurt yourself. So being really conscious of taking care of yourself along the way and managing all those factors is part of the interest and kind of the drama of doing the long distance and part of the challenge that I really like.
So what sorts of foods do you fuel yourself with beforehand and during the race?
So beforehand, I mean, whether I'm on a regular training run or race day morning, I eat pretty much something similar, which is just a piece of toast with nut butter and coffee and maybe an orange. I mean, it's pretty boring, just 300 or so calories. The key thing is fueling properly during the race, and that really depends on the event's duration and the pace you are trying to go. So if I'm doing a 50K, which maybe takes around 5 hours, 31 miles, which is again, this is slower pace than a road marathon. Like when I was in my prime racing road marathons, I could run marathons in close to 3 hours.
Oh my goodness.
And then a 5K takes about 5 hours. So for a 5-hour event, you don't need a ton of calories, but you do need quick burning sugar to fuel your body with carbohydrates, which are the source of fuel your body can break down and convert to energy most efficiently. So if I'm doing a 50K and I want to run fast and really race it, I'm just going to be taking sugar during it, the kind of energy gels and maybe some sports drink. When you get into ultras that take 12 to 24 hours, you need to eat a lot more and have more variety in what you're eating. So that's where aid stations come in to help, or 100 milers. I have some friends lined up to crew me who bring me things like chicken noodle soup or avocado roll-ups or whatever. So you really, on a long day on the trail, you want to eat more like a hiker or a trucker, solid foods like trail mix, peanut butter and jellies, calories that are not too difficult to digest, but that have a mix of carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat to satiate you because you're burning. I mean, it's very easy to get into a calorie deficit. I mean, theoretically, we have enough fat on our bodies that if we had to, we could keep going just by burning fat. But if your body is forced to get all of its energy source from burning fat, that is harder to do and doesn't feel as good, and your performance is really going to suffer. So that's why you need to keep taking in enough carbohydrates for quicker burning energy to keep going.
So you'll be running and then you'll have a friend over there on the side of the road with the chicken noodle soup, and you'll just eat it pretty quickly and then go run again. You can just...
Yeah, I mean, it depends. On some aid stations, I just cruise through and refill my water bottle. But if it's around lunchtime or dinner time and I want to eat something more substantial, I will pause for 5 minutes or so. And yeah, I've had a slice of pizza, quesadillas, whatever you can get down without upsetting your stomach.
Wow, and then you can just keep going. Not
Yeah.
that old mythology about don't jump in the pool right after you've eaten. No, you can just keep going.
Well, a part of training for ultras is you do have to train your gut. I mean, you have to learn what works for your digestive system to avoid nausea or GI distress. And that takes trial and error and a lot of experience.
And so training is most of your life, right? I mean, the races are only, what, 3, 4, 5 a year, I guess?
Absolutely. I coach people and I get clients come to me saying, oh, I want to run my first 50K. And they're so focused on the day of the event. I say, well, you really have to put the training in. I mean, it's like a cake. You have to bake the cake first. And the race is just the icing on the cake. Like, it's all about the training, the day by day, week by week training.
It's like process versus result. You have to really enjoy the process, not just be focused on the end result. If you're not enjoying the process, what's the point of the result in the end?
Exactly.
So the training itself, what is that like? I'm sure that it differs for each person and for each race that you're doing, but that's a lot of time. I'm sure you have to spend a lot of time every day, every week in training to get these miles in.
Well, yes and no. I mean, training waxes and wanes. It's a process called periodization, and it means breaking your training up into cycles of building up and then peaking and then recovering. So it all depends on where I'm at in the training cycle. Right now, for example, I'm training for actually a road marathon, and it's 5 weeks away. So, I'm running 50 to 55 miles a week, which isn't super high mileage, but I'm doing more of the training at a higher intensity because road marathons demand faster leg speed. Other times of the year, I go into what I call maintenance mode, which is just maintaining my base. So that's more like 30 miles a week, which is very manageable. I don't really have super long runs on the weekend. I still always run 5 to 6 times a week, but it doesn't have to be super long. So it all depends. And then when I'm peak training for a longer event like the summer 100 miler, then it's not just the volume of duration or mileage that matters, but it's really the specificity that matters. So I'll be aiming for a high volume of like 70 or so miles a week. But the more important thing is most of those miles are on terrain that matches the race I'm going to do. So it's a lot of high altitude mountain running and hiking and longer all day efforts.
When you're running, say, training for this marathon or anything, do you tend to listen to music, or do you just like to listen to the birds around you, or what do you think about when you're on these long runs?
I do everything, everything you just mentioned. So I do love podcasts and audiobooks. There's a safety risk to having earbuds in your ears when you're running. So I want to be careful with that. The solution I've come up with is when I listen to a podcast or an audiobook, I stick my phone in my hydration pack pocket and I play it off my phone speaker so I can still hear the ambient noise around me on the trail, but then I can hear the noise coming out of my pocket instead of having it right in my ears
Ah,
and blocking out the
that's
ambient noise.
smart.
Because yeah, when I'm on the trail solo, I might occasionally have a large animal encounter because we do have bears and deer and
Wow.
a few cougars. But the bigger risk really is mountain bikers. I want to hear if a mountain bike is barreling down the trail and move out of their way. So keeping my ears open is important. But to answer your question, I do love the occasional podcast and some audiobooks, but I also love just the quiet and tuning into nature around me.
Have you ever run into an animal, a bear?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the worst was when I was going along and I thought there was something wrong with my AirPods because they were all staticky. I'm like, why is it so staticky? I was really annoyed and I took them out and I realized there was a rattlesnake rattling right at
Oh
my
my
feet. That's
goodness.
what the static was.
Oh,
And it
that
was
would have made me
fine.
run really
It was
fast.
fine. Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen a lot of bears and thankfully they've always run away from me. It's just whether it's a wild animal like a bear or livestock like cattle, you have to be careful not to get in between the mother animal and its offspring. So thankfully I've never had a bad experience.
You mentioned that you run most days of a week, even if it's only 30 miles a week or something. Does your body ever just say, ugh, not today? Like your lower back is hurting or your quads or something like I just can't do it. And do you just power through that and say, nope, got to get out and do it? Or is your body just so tuned to this that your body craves wanting to run most days of the week?
No, I do listen to my body and it's absolutely varies from day to day or week to week. Especially, I mean, I'm menopausal now, but before I went through menopause, like 2 weeks out of every 4 weeks of the month, I felt really altered in a bad way because of PMS. And so I do think it's important to respect your body's energy levels. And so instead of skipping the run altogether, I just integrate a lot more hiking to make it low impact. I kind of try to practice self compassion, run at an intensity that feels comfortable. I mean, the vast majority of my runs I would call easy runs, which means I'm running at a low enough heart rate and breathing rate that I can still talk in full sentences and my shoulders feel relaxed and it's just a little bit faster than hiking and that's all you need to do. It's very simple. It's only once or twice a week when I really push the intensity with speed work or trying to really work some hills more aggressively, and it's important to have some high intensity running in your week to increase your cardiovascular fitness. But when I don't feel like going out or I don't feel good because of fatigue, then I just go slower and maybe not as far. If I'm truly sick or injured, though, of course, I'll take a rest day and recover.
And I know you live in Colorado, so you run all through cold, wintry days, right?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I can't run on trails because the high country trails are buried in snow, but there are plenty of plowed forest roads and back roads that are nice to run that have hard packed snow or that melt out to dirt. So I just strap on some little traction devices on my shoes and I just run around here in the winter. I mean, it's
Yeah.
cold. It
Be
can be cold.
prepared. So, in addition to the ultramarathons and the trail running, something that I was completely fascinated that you do and have done so successfully is something called stage races, which I hadn't known about before. Can you describe those for our audience?
Sure. There's a special type of race format called self supported stage races. It's an event that combines running with camping overnight, and it lasts for a week. And the distance, which is generally 155 to 170 miles, that distance is broken up into different stages. And so you run every day a certain amount, and then you get to camp, and then you rest until the next day's race starts. And so it's really exciting because it's different than other extra long ultra marathons. Like there's been a growth of 200-mile ultra marathons, which take people several days. And What I like about self-supported stage racing is there's a set route to do every day, and so you can actually race it and run it well, and then you have to rest and recover for the next day. But what makes it even more strategically interesting is you are responsible for carrying all of your food and gear for the week. So all that the race providers or race organizers provide are communal tents and water. Everything else, so a week's worth of calories is on your back
Amazing.
and your sleeping bag, sleeping pad. So basically you wear the same smelly clothes all week because you don't want to have to carry extra clothes. And so it strips you down to the bare essentials. Like, what are the fewest calories you can get away with eating during that week and still cover this endurance event as best as you can? So it's pretty wild. And then it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's very remote over extremely challenging terrain. So the 4 times I've done it, 3 have been on a course called the Grand to Grand Ultra. And it's called that because it starts at the north rim of the Grand Canyon and then it traverses BLM and forest land to the Grand Staircase Formation in southern
Wow.
Utah. So the temperatures swing from the low hundreds during the day. So you're just baking on these desert plateaus in full sun. But then by the end of the race, you're up in higher altitude forests and it's freezing cold at night. So you're just huddled in this lightweight sleeping bag and feeling pretty cold. So it's definitely a challenge, but it's such a beautiful journey. And then the one other one I did was on the big island of Hawaii, and it was called the Mana to Mana, and it traversed the whole big island from the Hilo side near Mauna Loa, around Mauna Loa, up over Mount Mauna Kea, and ended on the Kona side.
Wow.
So that was a crazy variety of climate and temperature with, torrential rains the first 3 days, and then baking hot the next 3 days. I felt like I was on an episode of Survivor. It was pretty hilarious
But
at
you're
times,
running a lot
but
more
that was
than
part of
Survivor.
it.
I mean, you're doing like back to back to back marathons.
Yeah, so the format is they have 6 stages during the week. Basically, days 1 and 2 are a marathon to 50K in length, and then day 3 is the long stage, which is the hardest. So it's over 50 miles through incredibly tough
Wow.
terrain. And then they do build in a rest day after that, so you just sit around camp for a day feeling hungry with nothing to do. Because that's another thing. These events are completely unplugged. Like there's no electricity. There's no way to recharge a phone or your smartwatch. So your phone's on airplane mode all week just to use for emergency or to take pictures. So you are really unplugged. You don't want to bring a book because
It's heavy.
the book is
Yeah.
extra weight that you have to carry. So it's a special experience because you bond with the other people doing this and it reignites the art of conversation. You sit around talking with these people at camp, waiting to do the race the next day. But then the final stages are also marathon to 50K in length. And then the final day's race is a so-called sprint of just like 5 to 7 miles that they finish in the middle of the day. And yeah, it takes everything out of you, but I absolutely loved it. And I don't know why it clicked for me, but I really excelled. And the first couple of times I did it, I finished second female and then third female. And then I really, really trained. The year I turned 50 years old, I said, I'm going to go back and do this. And I managed to win the event and as the only woman in the top 10.
Oh my goodness, it's so impressive.
It's very male dominated and I wanted to have at least one woman in the top 10. And I won that and finished that even though I had an hour time penalty. I got busted on day 3 or day 5, the penultimate stage, because they check your food and gear. And I had carried too few calories. So they punished me. Like I'd eaten too much earlier in the week. I didn't have enough calories for the last 48 to 72 hours. So they gave me a time penalty because I hadn't.
They
so
don't
that
let
was
you allocate your food as you'd like to?
No, they check. They want to make sure everyone has a minimum for safety reasons, which I understand. And I just had cut it too close. Yeah.
You wrote a really fascinating article about one of these races, and there's a funny anecdote in there about someone trying to trade 300 calories of oatmeal for 300 calories of something salty. I'm craving something salty. So people are trying to barter food by calories.
Yeah, but actually that's kind of on the down low. You are supposed to only have what you carry on your back for the week.
And so is that the same kind of food you talked about earlier, sort of what you would bring, but it has to be very light.
It has to be very light and very efficient. So no, it's really different because in an ultra marathon where there are aid stations providing a buffet of goodies and you can eat a lot of calories frequently, on these stage races, you have to really, really ration. And so basically, I'd have a dehydrated backpacker meal, which has a good amount of like 900 to 1,000 calories and a bunch of salt. So I'd have that at the end of the day, which was very satisfying. But then I did not have space in my pack for all the gels and other snacks and things that I would normally have. So you have to choose very calorie dense, efficient food. So it's an interesting thing to get through and make sure you have enough calories
What
for
was the
sure.
first thing you ate when you back to the real world? What did you crave?
Oh, I mean, for me, it's always pizza and beer. Like you can't go wrong with pizza and beer, right?
You also wrote about psychologically what a race like that does for you.
Yeah, I mean, it completely unplugs you from society, which is part of what I love. You are really stripped down to the basics, and but then you bond with the people you're sharing a tent with, so it feels kind of tribal. And you just realize how much your body can do and how much you can get through with so very little.
Your whole journey, the last, I guess you said 25 years, must give you so much confidence. I mean, look what you've done.
Not in real
Really?
life. Confidence on the trail, yes. But no, I mean, no, I mean, I'm being silly. Like, it definitely makes me realize I can train for and get through uncomfortable things. I mean, so much about ultra running is adapting to become comfortable with what is uncomfortable and developing the mental tenacity to get through with that. But I mean, when I think about other areas in life where I lack confidence, sometimes I can draw on my ultra running experience, and that's a nice thing. But it doesn't solve everything. I mean, I still definitely get nervous about things.
Do you think anyone could take up something like this if they just put their mind to it? Or does it take a certain body type, or you need to be a certain age to really get into running, or a certain genetic component to be able to handle this?
Theoretically, anyone could do it, but the two things it requires is one is desire. Like you have to actually have a desire. If it's not your thing, and it's not something you gain satisfaction from, then it's not going to stick. So the desire really needs to be there. But you do need to also have a certain level of health. I mean, if someone has some systemic or structural anatomical problems, pre-existing hip problems, or some significant foot problems, or they're significantly overweight, then it would take a lot of fixing to get healthier before you could increase the volume of your running. Heavy people absolutely can run, but they need to be careful of it because it has more impact on their lower body. So I really applaud, people getting into running to reach a healthier body weight and to exercise their heart. I think that's wonderful. You just have to be careful about it. And you have to kind of have a base level of fitness and health before you ramp up the mileage. The other end of the spectrum are, which I sadly see among a lot of women, are women who are unhealthy because they are too skinny. And I just know so many women who have fundamentally injured themselves because they overexercise, they run too far, they lose too much weight, and they get into what's called the female athlete triad, of where they don't have enough body fat or energy in their system to menstruate regularly, so they lose their periods, and then that in turn leads to diminished bone health, and that's why they get stress fractures or set themselves up for osteoporosis. So that is just bad on so many levels. And so yes, anyone can run ultra marathons with proper training, but they need to be healthy. And that's both psychologically healthy as well as physically healthy. I don't believe in running through injury or hurting yourself.
Yeah.
I'm all about longevity. I mean, I'm so proud I've been doing this for so many years. I want to keep doing it for 25 more years. And so, what I want to role model most of all is health and longevity.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. This has really been fun to talk to you. And I've learned so much about running and ultra running and self-supported stage races. So thank you for sharing with me.
Well, I just want to encourage anyone who's listening, who's interested in starting like I did with just a couple of miles. I mean, go for it. Running is so wonderfully simple. It's not like cycling or rock climbing or scuba diving. I mean, it is so simple. Just get out the door and try it, and you can get more specialized and learn more about it as you go. And the secret to mountain running is to embracing hiking as a lower gear of running. So just find your speed that feels sustainable and let yourself take walking breaks if you need to.
Oh, that's great tips. And thanks for the encouragement. Well, thanks again. It's really been a pleasure to talk with you. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, it's so much fun to talk about this, and I hope it inspires some other people to try running.
I think it will. I love Sarah's passion for running. It's almost infectious. I can't say I now have the urge to run ultras, but lots of what she shared did resonate with me, and I think can apply to all of us. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, start small. A few laps around a track can lead to a few miles and maybe will lead to a marathon one day. Or maybe not. Listen to your body and to your heart. 2, physical activity is a great stress reliever. 3, never underestimate the power of a 10-minute nap. Sometimes it's just the ticket for getting you refreshed and on your way for another few dozen miles. 4, don't always try to block out all the noise, metaphorically or literally. It's important to listen to the sounds of the world. What sounds like static could be a rattlesnake. 5, when you push yourself, you realize how much you can do. Becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable builds resilience. And finally, number 6, when it comes to running, or really anything in our lives, it really is about the journey, not the finish line. Thanks to Sarah Lavender Smith for sharing her stories and helping me experience the world of ultra running. Sarah is also an accomplished writer. Her book is called The Trail Runner's Companion, and she writes regularly at sarahrunning.substack.com. We'll include these links, as well as how to find her on social media, on our website, theexperiencepodcast.net. You can find all of our past episodes there, along with ways to connect with us on social media. Also, please sign up for our newsletter. You'll get information about new episodes, behind-the-scenes tips, and a lot more. It's easy. Just scroll down to the bottom of the homepage. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please tell your friends about it, and also subscribe. If you need help with how to subscribe, just go to our website and click on the How to Listen button. Thanks for joining the experience.